At dawn on July 2, 1945, the airfield at Balikpapan was alive with sound. Engines coughed and thundered across the humid morning air. Oil fumes mixed with salt from the nearby sea. 100 men moved like clockwork under a sun not yet fully risen, mechanics, armorers, pilots, crew chiefs, each one performing his small part in something enormous and dangerous. The target was deep inside Borneo, Japanese oil installations that had fueled their empire for years. The mission: to strike them, burn them, and cripple Japan's remaining supply chain once and for all. Among the aircrews preparing that morning was Flight Lieutenant Tom Russell, an Australian pilot with No. 22 Squadron of the Royal Australian Air Force. He was 26 years old, lean and quiet, with the habit of checking everything twice. Beside him, his navigator and gunner, Flight Sergeant Alan "Wwii" Harris, younger by a few years, cheerful, reckless in the way only men who had cheated death too many times could be. They had flown together for 6 months on low-level strike missions across the Pacific. Their aircraft, the Bristol Beaufighter, a twin-engine heavy strike plane the Allies called the Whispering Death. The Japanese had another name for it, the Silent Shark, because by the time you heard its engines, it was already too late. Tom had flown dozens of sorties. He had watched ships vanish under his rockets, seen tracer fire stitch the air around his canopy, and lost too many friends to count. But this mission felt different, bigger. The briefing said they would be flying at wave-top height under radar straight into one of the most heavily defended harbors left in the Pacific. Balikpapan was the heart of Japan's oil network in the Dutch East Indies. Destroy it, and they would strike a fatal blow to the enemy's war machine. At 0430 hours, the squadron assembled for the briefing. The air was thick with humidity and tension. The commanding officer stood before a chalkboard covered in maps and grid coordinates. Target: Balikpapan refineries and shore installations. Primary strike on oil storage tanks and pipelines along the waterfront. Expect intense anti-aircraft fire. Enemy fighters possible from Samarinda. Approach altitude 50 feet. 50 feet, that was not flying, that was skimming. At that height, a single mistake meant slamming into the sea, but it was the only way to get through the radar net alive. Tom glanced at Wwii beside him. The gunner grinned, tapping his lucky silver coin against his thigh. Tom forced a smile, but his stomach was tight. He had seen flak-tier aircraft apart like paper. He had seen what happened when one engine failed at low altitude. There was no time to recover, no time to pray. They returned to their aircraft, Beaufighter A19187, codenamed D for Dog. The armorers were loading rockets under the wings, each one painted with a small white shark-tooth grin, a superstition passed from crew to crew. 2 500-pound bombs sat cradled under the fuselage, gleaming dully in the light. Tom climbed the ladder into the cockpit, the familiar smell of metal, cordite, and fuel filling his lungs. He strapped in, checking every gauge and every switch. Wwii settled into the rear cockpit, humming a tune over the intercom. "Let's make some noise today, Skipper." Tom did not answer right away. He looked out across the runway, the other Beaufighters lined up, engines coughing to life, propellers biting through the morning mist. In that moment, he thought of home, of a beach near Sydney, of his mother's hands dusted with flour, of the strange, unreal idea that somewhere far away, people were sleeping peacefully while he prepared to kill and possibly die. He throttled forward. The engines roared, the aircraft trembled, straining against its brakes. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's go to work." The formation took off one by one, climbing briefly before leveling out at 50 feet above the sea. Waves flashed beneath them. The coast fell away behind. They flew southeast in tight formation, the lead navigator tracking by dead reckoning and stopwatch. There were no landmarks this far out, only endless blue-white foam and the occasional glint of sunlight off another Beaufighter's wingtip. For the first 20 minutes, the flight was silent except for the drone of twin Bristol Hercules engines. Then, over the radio, a clipped voice from the lead aircraft. "Approaching coast in 10, prepare for contact." Tom's pulse quickened. He adjusted the propeller pitch, scanned the horizon. Wwii swung his gun mount slightly, testing the traverse. The ocean below changed color, shallower, greener, the first sign of reefs near the Borneo coast. Then faint on the horizon they saw smoke, dark, lazy columns rising straight into the morning sky. Balikpapan. The harbor came into view, rows of oil tanks, dockyards, fuel lines, ships moored in the bay, and around them anti-aircraft guns, dozens, maybe hundreds. "Flak in sight," someone said over the radio. "Keep weaving, stay low." Tracer fire arced upward in glowing orange lines. Black puffs of smoke dotted the air ahead like bruises on the sky. Tom tightened his grip on the control column. He could feel the vibration of the engines through his bones. Every instinct screamed to climb, but at 50 feet, the sea itself was their shield. "Target ahead," Wwii called. Tom squinted through the gun sight. The first row of tanks loomed into view. He steadied the aircraft, the crosshair settling on a pipeline junction. Rockets armed, firing. The Beaufighter leapt as the rockets streaked away, trailing white smoke. They hit dead on. The explosion was enormous, a rolling fireball that sent waves of heat across the bay. Flames spread like liquid over the water, igniting oil slicks that turned the harbor into an inferno. "Good hit," Blue-Eye shouted. "Another pass." They swung around, diving through smoke and flak bursts. The air was alive with noise, the snap of shrapnel, the bark of guns, the roar of engines. Another Beaufighter streaked past, one wingtip trailing fire. Tom saw it crash into the bay, a flash, a column of steam gone. He forced himself not to look. Lined up the second target, a cluster of warehouses along the dock. Bombs away. The aircraft shuddered as the bombs fell clear. Seconds later, another eruption tore through the shoreline. Timber and metal flew skyward. Flak heavy, 12 o'clock high, Blue-Eye yelled. Tracer flashed past the canopy, a blur of red streaks. Tom rolled hard right, skimming the surface so low that spray hit the windscreen. Jesus, that was close. Keep us level. A shell burst behind them. Rocking the tail, the warning light flickered red, right engine oil pressure dropping. Hit on the starboard side, Tom shouted, feathering propeller. The propeller slowed to a blur, smoke curled from the engine nacelle. They were still flying, but slower now, vulnerable. Ahead, the formation was breaking off, each aircraft twisting through the maelstrom in its own desperate escape path. The radio crackled with voices, orders, prayers, screams, then silence. Tom set his jaw. "We're not dying here," he said. He turned west toward open water. The altimeter read 70 feet too high. He pushed the stick forward, back down to 50. Behind him, Blue-Eye's voice came through the intercom, calmer now, almost resigned. "She's holding together. Let's just get clear." Flak still chased them, but it was fading. The burning harbor receded into the distance, a black wound against the bright sky. The mission had succeeded, but at what cost? Tom could not yet know. He looked at the fuel gauge, low but enough. He steadied the plane and glanced once at the horizon, the vast emptiness between war and home. The coastline of Borneo stretched ahead like a dark green wall. To the north, the jungle shimmered with heat. To the south, the sea boiled with oil fires, thick black columns of smoke twisting into the sky like the fingers of some enormous hand. Everywhere below, the harbor burned. From 10 miles out, the entire bay looked alive. Flames rolled across the water, licking the shattered hulls of tankers and supply ships. Oil tanks along the shore were still exploding, one after another, like thunderclaps from beneath the earth. For the first time in months, Japanese fuel production in the region had been cut almost entirely off. The strike was working, but the cost was already mounting. Tom could see the smoke trails of other Beaufighters weaving and climbing ahead. Some were hit, streaming oil or flame. Others flew too low, clipping the waves as they tried to escape the curtain of anti-aircraft fire behind them. Everywhere he looked, chaos. And still, behind the roar of engines and the crack of flak bursts, his mind kept returning to one thought: we're not clear yet. The Japanese gunners had not given up. Even as the harbor vanished behind them, heavy guns on the ridgelines continued to track the fleeing aircraft. Each burst came closer, perfectly timed, as if the men on those guns had practiced for this exact moment. A shell burst just beneath their tail. The shockwave slammed through the fuselage, rattling every bolt. The cockpit filled with the smell of burning insulation. "Blue-Eye, check the tailplane," Tom shouted. A pause, then the gunner's voice. "Stabilizers scored, but still attached. She'll hold." Tom gritted his teeth. He had flown damaged aircraft before, but never this low, never this far behind enemy lines. They were 200 miles from their base, one engine hit and fuel bleeding faster than expected. And they were not alone. A voice crackled over the intercom, not Blue-Eye's, but another pilot's, faint and strained. "This is Red 2, I am hit, port engine gone, ditching 5 miles offshore." Then static, then silence. Tom knew that voice, Flight Sergeant Cooper. He had eaten breakfast with him 2 hours ago, now he was gone, just like that. "Keep your eyes peeled," Tom said softly. "They will be looking for stragglers." He was right. Moments later, Blue-Eye shouted, "Bandits 3 o'clock high." Tom glanced out his canopy. 3 small black shapes descending fast out of the sun. Zeros. Hold tight. He pushed the throttles forward both, though only one responded cleanly. The Beaufighter surged, engines screaming unevenly. He rolled left, keeping the nose low, hugging the waves again. Spray hit the windscreen in bursts as tracers streaked overhead. The Japanese fighters split apart, one diving, two climbing, a textbook pincer maneuver. The Beaufighter was no dogfighter, it was a strike aircraft built for speed and punishment, not agility. At low altitude, it had one advantage, its sheer bulk. The twin engines made it faster in a dive than anything chasing it. Coming in again, Blue-Eye called. The rear guns opened up short, harsh bursts that shook the airframe. Tom caught a flash in his mirror, one of the Zeros pulling back, smoke trailing from its wing, but the others pressed in closer. Starboard side, Tom yanked the stick left, rolling flat over the surface of the water. The altimeter dropped below 50 feet, now 40, now 30. The ocean filled his view. The Beaufighter's shadow skated over the waves like a black ghost. Another burst from the Zeros. Rounds tore through the right wing. Fuel sprayed outward, catching sunlight like glitter. Right tanks hit, Blue-Eye shouted. Cross-feeding to port, Tom replied. He reached down, switched the selector valve. The gauge steadied. They were alive for now. Can we climb? Blue-Eye asked. Tom shook his head. Not yet. The second we do, they will chew us apart. He kept them low, using the horizon's glare to blind the Japanese pilots. Minutes passed. Then suddenly, one of the Zeros pulled up too sharply, maybe trying to get a better angle. Tom saw it, a silver flash, and he seized the chance. He banked hard, cutting across the Zero's path. Blue-Eye fired a burst. The tracers stitched across the Zero's fuselage. It flared, rolled, and plunged into the sea. A column of water shot up, then vanished. Got him, Blue-Eye yelled, voice breaking with relief, but there were still two. They regrouped above, out of reach. Tom could almost feel their eyes watching, calculating. Then as suddenly as they had come, they broke off and vanished into the glare. For a moment there was silence, only the steady drone of engines and the hiss of air rushing past the canopy. Tom exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Think they are gone? Blue-Eye asked. For now, Tom said, but they will be waiting on the way back. He was not wrong. Half an hour later, as they reached open water, two more Japanese fighters appeared on the horizon. This time Tom did not wait. He dropped altitude again so low that the propellers were slicing mist off the waves and pushed the remaining engine to the red line. The Beaufighter thundered forward, shuddering with the strain. Minutes passed, then 10, then 20. The Zeros were gone. Lost them, Blue-Eye said finally. Yeah, Tom muttered. We will worry about the engine next. The right engine was running hot. The temperature gauge kept climbing, edging toward the red. Tom eased the throttle back, nursing it like an injured limb. The coastline was far behind now, just a smear of green through the haze. They were back over open sea, safer, but still 100 miles from home. Blue-Eye broke the silence. You ever think about what we are going to do when this is over? Tom smiled faintly. Every day. Yeah, me, I am going to open a pub somewhere with no sand, no mosquitoes, and definitely no bloody Beaufighters. Tom laughed, the first real laugh he had had in weeks. You running a pub? I will serve the coldest beer in Australia, Blue-Eye said. And you can drink for free since you keep getting us out of this mess. The conversation faded into quiet again, the kind that only comes after surviving something that should have killed you. For a while neither man spoke. Then the radio crackled. Red leader to all aircraft, check in. Static, a few voices answered, broken and faint. Of the 12 aircraft that had taken off that morning, only 6 were responding. Tom's stomach turned cold. 6, half the squadron gone. He switched the radio to standby, unwilling to listen to the silence that followed. The sky was pale now, the sun high, the air shimmered with heat. Ahead, faint on the horizon, was the glint of another Beaufighter, one of theirs, flying slow, wounded but alive. The hours blurred together. The fatigue set in, the kind that sank deep into your bones, heavier than fear. Every vibration, every flicker of the instruments, every cough from the engines made Tom's hands tighten on the controls. He had flown hundreds of hours in his life, but none had ever felt this long. Finally, the radio came alive again, a voice from base control. D Squadron, this is good enough tower. You are clear to approach. Winds northeast, 10 knots. Welcome home. Home. 2 syllables that had never sounded so fragile. Tom exhaled, feeling the tension drain from his chest. The airfield came into view, a strip of coral and crushed gravel cut into the jungle, shimmering in the heat. He brought the Beaufighter down gently, the tires kissing the runway. The right engine sputtered and died as they rolled to a stop. Silence again, only the sound of cooling metal. Blue-Eye climbed out first, wiping sweat and oil from his face. Bloody hell, he said softly. We made it. Tom did not answer. He was looking out toward the horizon, where smoke from Balikpapan still smeared the sky even from this distance. He knew what they had accomplished. The refinery was gone, the Japanese war machine crippled, but all he could think about were the empty places in the formation that would never be filled again. The engines ticked as they cooled, the scent of scorched oil hanging heavy in the still tropical air. Ground crew swarmed the returning Beaufighters, their hands moving fast but quiet, eyes searching each fuselage for holes, for stories written in bullet scars. On the far end of the strip, smoke from one crash still rose, a column of black against the pale morning sky. Tom Russell climbed down from the cockpit. His flight suit was soaked through, streaked with grease, salt, and blood that was not his. He stood for a moment beside the aircraft, resting a hand on its blistered skin. The Beaufighter had brought them back on one engine, coughing the whole way. She had earned her name, whispering death, and she had whispered them home. Blue-Eye Harris jumped down behind him, grinning despite the grime. Still think I should open that pub? He asked. Tom tried to answer, but all that came out was a hoarse laugh. The relief was too big to speak through. Then the relief curdled into guilt, because half the squadron had not returned. The operations tent was silent except for the scratching of pens. One by one, the surviving pilots and navigators came in, saluted, and gave their debriefs. Each report was short, just altitude, bearing enemy contact, damage, results. But the silence after each name told its own story. When Tom stepped up to the table, the squadron commander, Wing Commander Bill Farquhar, looked older than he had that morning. He rubbed at his temple with ink-stained fingers. "Russell," he said quietly, "yours." "3 ships confirmed burning," Tom said. "1 refinery hit, 2 crew lost from the formation, flak heavy, zeros engaged, 2 destroyed." Farquhar nodded. "Good work, get your crew checked by the medics." Then softer, "We will read the names tonight." Outside, the afternoon rain began, a thick tropical downpour that flattened the dust and hissed against the aircraft skins. The men did not run for shelter, they just stood in it, faces turned upward, letting the water wash the salt and smoke from their skin. That evening at dusk, the survivors gathered around a makeshift table of ammunition crates. No speeches, no ceremony, just a folded piece of paper and the commander reading names over the sound of rain on canvas. 12 crews had taken off that morning, 7 had returned. When he finished, nobody spoke. They just stood together, soaked and silent, listening to the jungle hum in the distance. Tom looked around at the faces he knew so well, all of them too thin, too tired, too old for their years. Blue-Eye stared at the ground, his hands trembling just enough to make his cigarette shake. After a while, someone began to hum quietly an old marching tune, and one by one the others joined in. It was not for morale, it was just something to fill the unbearable quiet between the names of the living and the memory of the dead. The next morning, mechanics counted the holes in the aircraft. Tom's Beaufighter had taken 43 hits. 1 round had passed through the seat cushion behind his head. Another had torn open the wing spar a few millimeters deeper, and the entire wing would have failed. Luck or fate or both had carried them home. For 3 days the squadron stood down. They patched wings, changed engines, wrote letters they did not know how to start. And all the while, the oil fires at Balikpapan burned on the horizon day and night like a second sun. Even from 200 miles away, you could smell them, a bitter, metallic stench that seeped into everything. When the reconnaissance photos came in, the scale of the destruction was clear. The refinery complex was gone, 35 tanks destroyed, piers shattered, pipelines melted into the shoreline. The Japanese war machine in Borneo had been gutted. The analysts estimated the strike had cut Japan's remaining fuel reserves by nearly 15%. For the air crews, the victory meant little. They saw only the faces missing from the mess tent. Tom sat on an empty ammunition crate outside his hut, writing a letter to Cooper's wife. He had started it 5 times and torn it up 5 times. How do you tell someone you watch the sky swallow their husband? In the end, he wrote only this: "He died doing what we all swore to do to bring this war to an end. He was brave, steady, and he never flinched." He signed it, folded it once, and handed it to the mail clerk without looking back. Weeks passed. War moved north. Borneo was nearly won, and the Japanese were falling back toward the Philippines and the home islands. But for the men of No. 22 Squadron, the cost stayed behind them like a shadow. Every new crew brought into the unit saw the names painted on the huts, the ones who never returned. Then in August, word came that the Americans had dropped a new kind of bomb, a weapon beyond comprehension. Within days, Japan surrendered. The war was over. There was no parade at Goodenough Island, just a simple announcement over the loudspeaker. Hostilities have ceased, all operations suspended. At first no one reacted, then a single cheer went up from the flight line, followed by another and another until the entire airfield roared. Men laughed, cried, threw their caps in the air. Blue-Eye ran straight into the sea, boots and all, shouting until his voice broke. Tom just sat on the wing of his aircraft, staring out at the horizon where the smoke of war had hung for years and was now finally gone. The months that followed were strange. Peace felt unreal, as if someone had suddenly turned off the noise of the world. The men drifted home in groups, first the injured, then the veterans, then those whose aircraft had nothing left to fight. By Christmas 1945, the Beaufighters were grounded for good. Tom Russell returned to Sydney that spring. He stepped off the train with a single duffel bag and the dull ache of someone who had spent too long in the sky. The air smelled different, clean, quiet. No smoke, no oil, no death. He did not know what to do with the silence. He took a job flying crop dusters in the Hunter Valley. Low flying came naturally now, too naturally. Every time he skimmed a field, the engine note reminded him of Borneo, of the sea flashing under his wings, of Blue-Eye's voice in his headset. They met sometimes for a beer, but mostly they lived separate lives, bound by something neither could fully explain. For years they did not talk about Balikpapan. When people asked what the war had been like, Tom would shrug and say, hot, loud, and far away. But sometimes, late at night, he would hear it again, the roar of rockets, the thunder of flak, the voice of a man calling out coordinates in the middle of hell. In 1950, Tom visited a reunion at the Royal Australian Air Force Museum in Point Cook. They unveiled a restored Beaufighter, polished and perfect, the same model he had flown. Visitors took photos, children stared wide-eyed at the shark-tooth paint on the nose. Tom stood at the rope barrier, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. A young officer approached him. "Sir, did you fly one of these?" Tom smiled faintly. "Once." "What was it like?" He looked at the plane for a long moment. "It felt like riding a storm you could not stop," he said. "But it always brought you home." In 1975, 30 years after the mission, veterans of the Balikpapan strike were invited to Canberra for a ceremony. Only a handful could attend. Time had taken more than flak ever did. They sat together in the front row, grey-haired, stooped, medals gleaming faintly in the winter sun. The minister spoke of courage, sacrifice, and victory. He read from official reports about fuel depots destroyed and tonnage burned. But when he finished, Tom leaned toward Wwii and whispered, "They still do not know the half of it." Wwii nodded. "Maybe they do not need to." After the ceremony, a reporter asked them what they remembered most. Tom answered simply, "The smell of oil on the wind and the men who never came back." Decades later, when the archives finally opened, historians rediscovered the Balikpapan raid. They called it one of the most daring low-level strikes of the Pacific War. But for the men who flew it, it was never about daring. It was about doing what had to be done, flying straight into fire because someone had to light the way out of it. Tom Russell passed away in 1989. Wwii Harris died 3 years later. Their obituaries were short, just a few lines in the local paper: veteran pilot, distinguished service, loved husband and father. But in the records of the Royal Australian Air Force, the mission still stands. Balikpapan, July 2, 1945, 12 aircraft dispatched, 7 returned, target destroyed, and somewhere in the humid air above the Java Sea, the ghosts of those machines still fly, Beaufighters skimming the waves, engines whispering through smoke and fire. You can almost hear them if you listen close enough, the steady hum of courage, the echo of fear, the heartbeat of men who refused to stop until the sky itself was safe again. That is how the Pacific was won, not only by generals or admirals, but by mechanics, gunners, and pilots who fought physics, weather, and death itself and still came home. Because sometimes history turns not on speeches or medals, but on men who simply kept flying. For more stories like this, be sure to subscribe.